Hello everyone, my name's Rob, welcome to Kinetic Rugby League. In this video I'm going to be giving you my NRL semi-finals tips and predictions. If you want to see how I got on last week, you can check the pinned comment down below. But without further ado, let's get started on the first game for this week. Starting off for this week, we have Melbourne Storm versus Sydney Roosters. Starting with Melbourne Storm, they finished their regular season in third place on the ladder. They've won 4 in their last 5 games and their home record is 9 wins and 3 losses. They also lost last time out against the Broncos. This week, they'll be hosting from Amy Park in Melbourne. Looking at the squad that they've announced so far for this week, in the backs it includes Nick Meaney, Will Warbrick, Marion Seve, Justin Olam, Remus Smith, Cameron Munster and Jerome Hughes. Looking at the forwards, they've included Tui Kamikamica, Harry Grant, Christian Welch, Trent Liero, Alicia Katoa and Josh King. On the bench is Alec McDonald, Tom Eisenhuth, Nelson Asfa-Solomona and Tariq Sims. Looking at the percentage stats for Melbourne Storm, they have a 65% win rate, 80% completion rate and a tackle efficiency of 86.7%. Moving on to the Roosters, they finished their regular season in 7th place on the ladder. They've won 5 in their last 5 games. Their away record is 5 wins and 7 losses. They also won last time out against the Sharks. Looking at the squad that they've announced so far for this week, in the backs it includes James Tedesco, Fetalega Pauga, Paul Momirovski, Corey Allen, Jackson Barlow, Luke Keary and Sam Walker. In the forwards is Fletcher Baker, Brandon Smith, Lindsay Collins, Siwa Wong, Nat Butcher and Victor Radley. And on the bench is Sandon Smith, Egan Butcher, Terrell May and Angus Crichton. Looking at percentage stats for the Roosters, they have a 52% win rate, 74% completion rate and a tackle efficiency of 87.3%. So this is going to be a pretty interesting game for me. I do think if this was a full team on full team scenario, so, you know, if you included Ryan Papenhuyzen, God rest his soul, I know he's not dead, but it feels like it. I felt so sorry for him last week. If the Roosters had a full team available, so they weren't missing Tupou or Suwali or Manu, I think they'd be in a much stronger position here. They do still have a very strong team available, of course, and I think the forward pack is going to do a great job in battling against the forward pack and the big players that Melbourne Storm can put forward in this game. And they were exposed a little bit against the Broncos. Well, not a little bit. They were exposed quite heavily last week against the Broncos. But we always have this kind of feeling around Melbourne Storm, and especially with Craig Bellamy as a coach, it's very rare that he loses back-to-back games. This season in particular has been very different for Melbourne Storm compared to recent years. Like last season, or even the year before, you'd think Melbourne Storm lose a game, maybe they'd lose it again, but they're not going to lose 3 times in a row. It's not going to happen. But this Melbourne Storm team is a little bit more vulnerable. They do lack something. What that is, I don't know. It might be organisation, might be penetration, like with the lack of Ryan Papenhuyzen featuring this year. That might be it. Nick Meaney, I think he does a good job. I can't remember who it was. There was a pundit that said this exact phrase. He said that they've been good, not great. I think it was Braith. Might have been Braith on Fox League. Said they've been good, not great. So I completely agree with that. Melbourne Storm have been good, but not great. Whereas Sydney Roosters, at the start of the season, they were just bad. They weren't even okay. They weren't even good. They were just bad. They were a bad team. They're now, I would call them a great team. And especially after the kind of performance that they had to put in last week, the way that they fought against the Sharks to come out on top. Solid performance from them, and, you know, they got it done. It was one of the closer games of that week, and they made it happen. So, fair play to the Roosters. I'm now thinking maybe there's a good possibility that the Roosters come out and win this one. I think it's absolutely possible that the Roosters win this one, and if they do, I wouldn't be surprised. But I think, for me, the individual quality in this Melbourne Storm team, for me, is always needs to be considered. Kind of like, regardless of how the team plays, the individual quality just cannot be ignored. So Melbourne Storm might be out of form, but you still have Nick Meaney who's doing pretty well. They might be out of form, but you still have Cameron Munster, or you might still have Jerome Hughes, or even Harry Grant. You just can't write off Melbourne Storm, especially with those kind of players included in the squad. Now, I think a spine of Tedesco, Keary, Walker, and was it Egan that was starting as well? Brandon Smith, sorry. I don't know why I said Egan. Brandon Smith in the spine is very strong for the Roosters. They can control the game. They can certainly find ways to open up Melbourne Storm because they're not impenetrable. We've seen that this season. And they can certainly be shut out, especially as we saw last week against the Broncos. And there's a lot the Roosters can take. But as much as I like what the Roosters have been doing, with Manu missing, with Suwali missing, I can't see all that good work that the spine can do for the Roosters. I think will be undone by the fact that it's kind of a makeshift backline, if that makes sense. So if you're a Roosters fan, I don't think that's, it's not a cause for concern. I think you should still be confident in your ability to win this game. If you're a Melbourne Storm fan, I wouldn't straight up come out and say we are definitely going to win this game just because Manu and Suwali aren't there, because the spine for the Roosters is exceptional. But for me, I do think that Melbourne Storm is a little bit more intact. I think a coach like Craig Bellamy will get them on the right track after such a lacklustre performance last week. Would last week's performance take a lot out of the Roosters? Maybe. I don't really read into that too much. Like, you have to put in one really solid shift 1 week and then it's all of a sudden, like, that's everything gone. All your fitness, all your stamina, everything you had is all gone the next week. I don't believe that kind of stuff. Sometimes it can have an effect, but I don't think it's that severe. But I would say that battle in the middle with the forwards is going to be exciting to see. Brandon Smith against Harry Grant. I think Harry Grant wins that every time against anyone in the league. Even if Ben Hunt's at number 9. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter who it is. Harry Grant's the best hooker in the league. Simple as that. So the forward battle's going to be interesting, but Harry Grant gives him that little bit of an edge. And Brandon Smith, we still need to see a little bit more from him. I'm not fully convinced he's like the guy yet, but he's certainly been improving these last few weeks. And that is great to see from him because it wasn't going very well. But to kind of wrap things up and kind of conclude and aim towards a prediction, the forward pack for both teams is going to be interesting to see. But I do think the fact that the back line of the Melbourne Storm seems a little bit more stable to me, with the presence of Justin Olam, possibly on the side of the Roosters' defence that's going to be a little bit out of shape. He can certainly exploit that. And if the communication isn't there for the Roosters, they're going to struggle defensively. So I think the individual brilliance of Cameron Munster and Jerome Hughes especially is going to have a big impact on this game. And I think that's going to tip it for me. So this can be, I think it will be a tight game, but for me, it's Munster and Hughes that are just going to get a hold of the ball a lot, take on the line, cause problems, and attack the weak areas of this Roosters team because they are slightly depleted. So I'm going to go with a Melbourne Storm win, 1 to 12 points. Finally, we have the New Zealand Warriors versus the Newcastle Knights. Starting with the Warriors, they finished their regular season in 4th place on the ladder. They've won 3 in their last 5 games, and their home record is 8 wins and 4 losses. They also lost last time out against the Panthers. This week, they'll be hosting from the Go Media Stadium in Auckland. Looking at the squad that the Warriors have announced so far for this week, in the backs it includes Chance Nickel-Klokstad, Dallin Watene-Zelezniak, Rocco Berry, Adam Pompey, Marcelo Montoya, Tamare Martin and Sean Johnson. In the forwards is Aden Fanoa-Blake, Wade Egan, Mitch Barnett, Jackson Ford, Marata Niokore and Tohu Harris. And on the bench is Dylan Walker, Jazz Tavanga, Bailey Siranen and Josh Curran. Looking at percentage stats for the Warriors, they have a 70% win rate, 78% completion rate and a tackle efficiency of 88.1%. Moving on to the Knights, they finished their regular season in 5th place on the ladder. They've won 5 in their last 5 games, and their away record is 5 wins and 6 losses. They also won last time out against the Raiders. Looking at the squad that they've announced so far for this week, in the backs it includes Kalen Ponga, Dominic Young, Dane Gagai, Bradman Best, Greg Marju, Tyson Gamble and Adam Clune. Onto the forwards, they have Jacob Saifiti, Phoenix Crosland, Leo Thompson, Tyson Frizzell, Dylan Lucas and Adam Elliott, and on the bench is Kurt Mann, Daniel Saifiti, Jack Hetherington and Matt Croker. Looking at percentage stats for the Knights, they have a 57% win rate, 76% completion rate and a tackle efficiency of 87.9%. So I would say for this game, it's understandable that the Warriors are the favourites for this one because you have Sean Johnson coming back into the team, and there's going to be questions, okay, well, if the Warriors had Johnson last week, would the scoreline look any different? Would the result be any different? I think maybe the scoreline would be different, but I don't think that the result would have been any different. I think the Panthers still would have got one over on the Warriors either way, even with Johnson included. Now, the Knights are going to be missing Jackson Hastings. And he's a big miss for them. He controls their kicking game typically. But I don't think it's going to be such a big deal if it has to rest on Tyson Gamble. I think Clune might just take on that responsibility. And look, if we take a look at the performances last week, the Warriors just weren't in it. Simple as that. The Panthers were too good. And this is one concern that I had about the Warriors. Personally, I was, for most weeks, confident that they were going to win. That's just how I saw it. They were doing fine, like throughout the season, from the start into the middle, and then they started to excel. And when I started, giving my predictions, I was always confident that the Warriors could win, but when it came to the games, there was always something that was, for me, was just off. So I always had the confidence that they'd win, but I don't think I could ever back them in like a big game, because I've not seen enough from them, even when they've won, to constitute backing them for a big game. And for me, this is a big game, clearly. So we compare that to the Knights. Last week's performance, it wasn't great compared to what we see as a depleted Raiders team. Now, there's two ways of looking at this one. Either this is an indication that the Knights just aren't going to be good enough at this stage, because they came up against a depleted Raiders team and should have really had a comfortable win. That's one way we could look at it, because they had the lead. I believe, I need to double check, but they had the lead, they lost it, and then they retook the lead, and then had to go into Golden Point, basically. So one way you can look at it is that they didn't have control over the game. Control over a game that they should have control over. The other end of the spectrum is that they're playing against a depleted Raiders team that is fighting for their lives in finals. They win or go home, and they are giving it absolutely everything they've got, given the kind of bad circumstance that they're in, and they're putting everything they have into that game. And yet the Knights still got it done. They fought against a team with a particularly strong forward pack, and people forget about that with the Raiders sometimes. People do notice it, but I think some people forget. The back line was depleted. It wasn't their usual go-to, but I'm sort of focusing on the side of the spectrum that says the Knights beat a depleted Raiders team that was fighting for their lives. That's the way I'm looking at it, because we look at the win streak that the Knights have been on. They are gonna have close games. Like, you could take, let's say the Knights won the first 26 rounds of the regular season, and they play whoever in round 27. Just because they won 26 in a row, it doesn't mean that it's going to be an easy game. You might still back them to win, sure, but you still get close games. That is still going to happen. There are going to be times where you're slightly off. And, the Knights are allowed to do that. They've been as successful as they have been the last few months. I mean, they don't want to be off, but it's allowed to happen here and there. But obviously not in finals, you want to be careful of it. So I do think that even though Johnson is back for the Warriors, Hastings is missing for the Knights, I still think that the Knights are in the best position here, because Clune can just take on the kicking responsibilities. Tyson Gamble could do it as well, but I think Clune can focus on that. I still think he's a decent enough replacement. It kind of takes that balance out the spine. I've used that same word to describe this spine the last few weeks, is balance. There's a perfect balance with that, and maybe it's thrown off a little bit with Clune being in there over Hastings. But I think the same could be said with the Warriors and the fact that Metcalf isn't there. Because Tamari Martin was doing a good job with them, but they'd found some consistency with Metcalf. So for me, it kind of balances out a little bit on the spine for both teams. Now, the forward pack for the Warriors is going to be extremely strong, especially with Fanua Blake in there. He's going to be incredibly strong. I don't know if the Knights can compete with that in the forwards. Personally, I don't think they can. I think the forward battle goes to the Warriors. I do think it's going to be a case of most possession is going to be in the Warriors' favour, because the forwards are going to win the battle in the middle of the park, and Sean Johnson's kicking game is going to be very effective for them in retaining possession. I think a few goal line dropouts, maybe a 40-20 here or there, pinning the Knights back into the corner. That's certainly what the Warriors will aim to do. And I think possession and field position is going to be in favour of the Warriors. I just think the Knights will find it easier to open up the Warriors than the Warriors opening up the Knights. That's just a personal gut feeling about the game. Not to say that the Warriors can't just open up the Knights easily. There's a good chance that they can. But for me, I think the Knights are just too strong. And of course, you include Kalen Ponga in that. He's going to find ways to open up the Warriors. He's going to find ways to do it. Even with the Knights constantly winning, they have had tough games in there and they've still got it done. And I've not been convinced that the Warriors can compete in the top games. And just like what I said for Storm and Roosters, if the other team won, so in this case, I'm calling the Warriors the other team, if the other team won, it wouldn't surprise me. I still think the Knights can get it done, but it wouldn't surprise me if the Warriors won because this is an incredibly close game. But I just think the Knights have enough here. They'll lose in the forward battle. They'll lose in field position, but they'll just find ways to get through them. Tyson Gamble is going to be on it. I think his kicking game is effective enough to not match Sean Johnson, but to at least compete well enough to help with field position. I think Kalen Ponga is going to find ways to open up the Warriors. Phoenix Crosland has done a really good job at number 9 since he's been like the consistent hooker for the Knights. I hope it makes sense, but I just cannot back the Warriors. I've not seen enough from them to see that they can compete at the top, and the Knights have just been getting it done again and again and again and again. Simple as that. The Knights are getting it done. The Warriors, for me, I'm not convinced. So, again, this could go the other way, but I'm going to go with the Knights to win 1 to 12 points. So to recap my predictions for this week, I'm going to go with Melbourne Storm 1 to 12 points and the Knights 1 to 12 points. In terms of my winner's confidence, I'm at about 50%. This could really go either way with both games. In terms of margin confidence, I'm actually about 95%. Now the reason for that is because I think if Melbourne Storm do win or the Newcastle Knights do win, it's not going to be 13 plus. I mean, it could be, but I don't see it happening that way. So it is, if the winner's going to go my way, I think it's going to be a narrow game. Simple as that. These games are too close to go with a 13 plus. If you are going to bet this week, I'd say maybe just pick a few try scorers, maybe Dominic Young to score any time, maybe Greg Marju any time, possibly Cameron Munster as well. That's what I'd possibly include in a bet, but yeah, that's my recap for this week. So that's going to be it for this video. If you have any predictions, let me know in the comments down below. Also, let me know how you got on last week. But that's going to be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.